me ask you this. Why do you think Nancy Pelosi has held off her impeachment caucus?
Because I think she feels that I will win much easier. I mean, I've been told that by many people.
Do you think impeachment's good politics for you?
I think I win the election easier, but, I'm not sure that I like having it. Look, I did nothing wrong. I was spied on. What they did to me was illegal. It was illegal on the other side. I did nothing wrong. So impeachment's a very unfair thing because nothing that I did was wrong. And if you look at the Mueller report, there was no collusion. This was all about collusion.
Nowhere in the Mueller report, by the way, Mr. President, you say no collusion. There is not a single, I've read this Mueller report, both parts of it.
Use the word collusion.
There's not one place it says nothing happened.
Use the word collusion. Use the word conspiracy.
Never says no collusion.
I'll be honest with you. Nobody even mentions Russia anymore since the Mueller report. They don't mention it, in all fairness.
Tonight, there are now 74 House Democrats and 1 Republican who say it is time to open an impeachment inquiry into Donald Trump over the findings of the Mueller report. But still no signs that House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is budging in her opposition to pursuing impeachment. There is also new information tonight concerning another target of the investigation. Late today, a federal judge unsealed more than 50 pages of texts between former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort and Fox News host Sean Hannity, texts from the years 2017 and 2018. Robert Mueller was appointed as special counsel in May of 2017, and 2 months later, on July 26th of that year, the FBI carried out a raid on Manafort's Virginia home. On August 9th, the day that news broke, Hannity sent this text to Manafort, quote, "There are so many obvious crimes that are not being investigated, a deep state leak a day, and little to nothing to be being done. If you ever want to talk, grab dinner, vent, strategize, whatever, I am here." The next day, Hannity told Manafort to watch his show. Then, on August 11th, Manafort wrote back, quote, "I appreciate what you tried to do. Mueller is trying to intimidate me. This raid is just one example. I feel all alone out there." The two men remained in touch throughout 2017, with Hannity continuing to offer his unwavering support. Then in late January of 2018, Manafort wrote, quote, "Sean, per our conversation this morning, my attorney, Kevin Downing, will call you at 11:30 tomorrow. He will update you on what we are doing and how it connects to your reporting." Hannity replied, "Awesome." Later that year, another exchange shows Manafort insisting he would strike no cooperation deal with Mueller. Hannity starts the exchange, quote, "Why don't you get a sweetheart deal like Gates?" Manafort says, "They would want me to give up DT or family, especially JK. I would never do that." Hannity, "Understand, there is nothing to give up on DT. What about what did JK do?" Manafort, "Nothing, just like I did nothing. They will want me to make blank up on both. I will never do that." Tonight, Hannity responded by posting this on social media, quote, "My view of the special counsel investigation and the treatment of Paul Manafort were made clear every day to anyone who listens to my radio show or watches my TV show." Manafort is now serving a 7.5-year prison sentence on charges brought by former counsel Robert Mueller. He was the only defendant to be convicted at trial in that investigation. Joining me now, Harry Litman, a former federal prosecutor and former Deputy Assistant Attorney General, and Josh Gerstein, senior legal affairs contributor for Politico. Josh, let me just start with you on the sort of the mechanics of this. This news crossed the wire a couple hours ago that all these text messages were suddenly out there. What prompted that?
Well, I think there's been an effort by the judge that handled the Manafort case, as well as by journalists, to try to get all the sort of loose ends of these various Mueller prosecutions unsealed. And so we've been seeing in a variety of different contexts of different court proceedings, dribs and drabs coming out of things that were filed under seal at different points when this case was being hotly litigated involving Manafort. And so it finally emerged on a Friday afternoon as they were sort of cleaning up some of this paperwork, I think.
And Harry, 50 pages of text. We read from some of them there. You'll hear Sean Hannity's response to this. He says, look, this is basically what I say on my TV show every night. And certainly reading through them, I was getting that same impression, having that same reaction. Is there anything legally significant in these texts, or is it just interesting to see?
Well, I don't think there's that much legally about him. Of course, we knew, it's true, Sean Hannity, you knew his viewpoint, but you didn't know he was participating and in cahoots, so to speak, with Paul Manafort. The legal significance went to Manafort, who was under a gag order at the time and was brazenly violating it, and that's the reason, in fact, this stuff first came up and eventually stopped. Judge Jackson said, what's going on? You're under a show cause order that you're not violating this, and that's when he stopped playing footsie with Manafort. So there's no legal issue, but there's a kind of a strange political issue, the way things are intertwined between supposed objective reporters and one of the actual objects of the story.
So again, this is related to the Mueller investigation. Then, of course, there are the congressional investigations, and news today from Jerry Nadler, the House Judiciary Chairman. Josh, on one front, Nadler talking about that appearance by Hope Hicks yesterday, where Hope Hicks said very little. Nadler said he got something very significant out of that hearing. What is he claiming?
So Nadler told our Politico reporters in an interview that he believes that Hope Hicks is intransigent when it comes to answering certain questions. She really wouldn't answer any questions related to the time she served in the White House. And Nadler believes that the breadth of that refusal on Hicks's part will actually be to the committee's advantage. There are going to be court fights not only about Hicks's testimony, but also about testimony from various other witnesses, folks like Don McGahn and others. And those fights are already underway in federal court with different committees. And Nadler believes that the breadth of this refusal on Hicks's part, she refused to discuss where her desk was in the West Wing of the White House. She refused to say whether a war broke out over certain topics during the time she was there. And the chairman of this Judiciary Committee thinks that just the way that was handled will highlight to judges sort of the implications of granting this kind of a broad protection to the White House and effectively tactically undercut the White House's case.
So Harry, we've seen a couple times now Nadler has claimed dramatic breakthroughs publicly. Here's one case. Also, he talked about getting access, he said, to some of Mueller's most sensitive, most significant files. Is this bluster? Is this somebody trying to make it seem very significant in terms of the court of public opinion, what's happened? Or do you think there's something to the argument he's making here that this is going to really help him, really going to help Democrats in these court fights ahead?
Bluster, mostly. I don't think it really gave him that much. The breadth, as Josh says, the breadth of the objection was already clear. It's somewhat dramatic to see a transcript where 155 times she's ordered to stand down and not respond. But the legal rationale is the same. The sense that it actually sets up something big that wouldn't already have been set up. I think there's this, ongoing tension in the caucus, whether it's worthwhile to have brought her in, whether it was okay to do her behind closed doors, and I think in a sense he's claiming victory where at best he got a tie.
And also some new reporting tonight. I think we can put this up on the screen from the Wall Street Journal. This having to do with the Attorney General, William Barr, and the investigation he's launched into the Russia investigation from the Wall Street Journal. This review, they say, is focused, there you see the headline, is focused in part on the U.S. intelligence assessment that found Moscow intervened in the 2016 presidential election to help then candidate Donald Trump, that it will look in particular at whether there were disagreements among the intelligence analysts, and that the review is also likely to look into whether the findings were motivated by political opposition to Mr. Trump. And Harry, that's a theme, obviously. I think you heard it right there in that interview we played from the president coming in. That's a theme that he and his supporters, his allies, have been pressing heavily. What do you make of what we're learning about the contours of this investigation Barr is leading?
Well, the fact of it, and what we already knew, was significant, that he's doing this for a third time, and he does really seem to approach it with a sense of real gravity about what might have happened. In terms of the contours, we've learned this 2 or 3 times. They're pretty obvious contours for what the U.S. Attorney in Connecticut, Dunham, would be looking at anyway. So I think this is a kind of report that states the obvious, and it's really not sourced. But yes, of course, if you're going to look at that, you're going to talk to certain people. I don't think that tells you anything new. The big news, of course, is just that the probe is going on, and that while it's going on, Trump has a great talking point for his political rallies, investigate the investigators and the like.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.